When Europe stood on the brink of collapse, one king and his cavalry would change history forever.
The morning air over Vienna was heavy with a damp, clinging mist. From the towers of St. Stephen's Cathedral, the city looked like an island adrift in a gray sea. But this sea was made of smoke, dust, and fear. Beyond the ramparts, the vast encampment of the Ottoman army sprawled to the horizon, campfires like 1,000 watchful eyes in the pre-dawn gloom. Men whispered in the streets below, their voices low, as if afraid the enemy might overhear. Inside the walls, bread was scarce, hope scarcer still. Yet even in that darkness, a spark of defiance burned. Somewhere, help was riding hard across Europe, and with it, the possibility that Vienna and all that it stood for might yet be saved. For centuries, the Ottoman crescent had advanced like the tide, slow, steady, and relentless. Cities that once rang with church bells now echoed to the call of the muezzin. Fortress after fortress had fallen, each one another stone pried loose from the wall of Christendom. And now, the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa stood at the brink of his greatest triumph, Vienna, the golden gateway to the west. His camp was not merely an army's rest, it was a city of war, ordered and immense, with avenues of tents, bustling markets, and the looming scarlet pavilion where the fate of nations was plotted. In the emperor's court, messages arrived daily, inked in desperation. Vienna must hold, but without aid, it could not hold for long. For centuries, the Ottoman crescent had advanced like the tide, slow, steady, and relentless. Cities that once ran with church bells now echoed to the call of the muezzin. Fortress after fortress had fallen, each one another stone pried loose from the wall of Christendom. And now, the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa stood at the brink of his greatest triumph, Vienna, the golden gateway to the west. His camp was not merely an army's rest, it was a city of war, ordered and immense, with avenues of tents, bustling markets, and the looming scarlet pavilion where the fate of nations was plotted. In the emperor's court, messages arrived daily, inked in desperation. Vienna must hold, but without aid, it could not hold for long.
Far to the north, in the Kingdom of Poland, rode a man whose name carried the weight of hard-won victory. John III Sobieski, warrior, tactician, monarch, was a figure both feared and admired. His campaigns against the Ottomans had already earned him the title the Lion of Lech. The news from Vienna was more than a call for help. It was a challenge to his honor, his faith, and his very vision of Europe's future. Sobieski did not hesitate. Through skillful diplomacy, he forged an alliance with Emperor Leopold I, binding together nations that only months before had eyed each other with suspicion. And when he summoned the Winged Hussars, Poland's elite cavalry, their backs crowned with sweeping eagle feathers, he was not just raising an army, he was unleashing a legend.
By early September, Vienna had become a city living entirely in the shadow of death. The outer suburbs were already nothing more than smoking ruins, sacrificial ground cleared to deny the invaders cover. Within the walls, the streets were a maze of rubble and ash. Every able body was a soldier now, whether they carried a musket, a pike, or a bucket of water for the fires. The thunder of the Ottoman artillery was relentless, a rhythm that governed every heartbeat of the day. Masonry groaned with each impact, Dust sifted constantly from ceilings into bread dough, into water, into lungs. Sleep came in snatches, stolen between bombardments. Mothers cradled their children beneath stairwells, whispering stories over the cannonade in an attempt to make the noise sound like something less than the end of the world. Beneath their feet, an even more sinister threat crept closer. Ottoman sappers tunneled under the walls, shoring up their dark corridors with timbers, hauling forward barrels of black powder. Defenders lay on their bellies in silence, ears pressed to the soil, feeling for the faint tremor of pick against stone. Sometimes they counterdug, meeting the enemy in a cramped hell of smoke, flame, and steel, where there was no sky, no horizon, only survival. Hunger gnawed at every stomach. Fresh meat had vanished weeks ago. Bread was a better mixture of rye, husks, and whatever could be ground into meal. But in the hearts of Vienna's people, there was a stubborn, almost furious refusal to yield. They had become part of the walls themselves, cracked, battered, yet still standing. Far away, in the dense forests and rolling hills to the north, the answer to Vienna's prayers was on the move. Sobieski's relief force was a patchwork of banners and tongues. Poles in winged armor, Austrians in battered cuirasses, Bavarian pikemen, Saxon musketeers, tens of thousands bound together by urgency. They moved with a speed that defied logic. Rivers were crossed on hastily built pontoon bridges, their timbers creaking beneath the weight of cannon and supply wagons. Horses waded up to their chests in icy currents, urged on by shouts in half a dozen languages. In mountain passes, men became beasts of burden, straining in silence to heave wheels over boulders, hauling barrels of powder by hand when the paths grew too narrow for carts. The march was not without cost. The dead of exhaustion lay wrapped in cloaks beneath the trees, mourned briefly before the column pressed on. Fires at night flickered against the forest, revealing faces drawn tight with fatigue. Yet every morning the line formed again, armor buckled, boots laced, eyes fixed southward. For they knew that each step, each mile gained, was a day stolen back from the jaws of the siege. By the evening of September 11th, the relief force crested the Kahlenberg Heights. From there, the whole valley unfurled. Vienna's battered ramparts, the city crouched like a wounded animal, and spread below it the sprawling Ottoman host, campfires like constellations fallen to earth. Sobieski studied the field, his face unreadable. Around him, officers murmured, tracing arcs and arrows in the dirt by firelight. The plan was as daring as it was simple. Drive the Allied infantry down the slopes at dawn to strike the Ottoman flank, hold them fast, and then, when the enemy was straining to meet that blow, release the cavalry in a single, decisive strike. As darkness deepened, the camp took on the hush before a storm. Some men sharpened blades slowly, each rasp of stone on steel a private meditation. Others prayed aloud, their words mingling in a low susurrus. A few wrote letters, the ink trembling with the knowledge that this might be their final message home. In the distance, the faint glow of the Ottoman Red Pavilion marked the heart of the enemy. By morning, one side's banners would stand there, and no one knew whose.
The morning of September 12 broke pale and cool, the vineyards below still cloaked in mist. Then came the creak of leather harness, the clatter of pikes, and the long shout of men stepping off downhill. The Allied infantry flowed down the slopes like water freed from a dam, muskets slung, bayonets and halberds ready. At first, the Ottoman lines wavered, startled by the sudden fury from the heights. But Kara Mustafa was no stranger to war. Drums rolled, orders cracked out, and the Janissaries moved to meet the assault, their silks flashing as they formed ranks. The vineyards became killing grounds, each row of twisted vines fought over as fiercely as any fortress wall. Musket balls tore leaves and flesh alike. The air turned thick with smoke and the tang of powder. For hours, the hills rang with musketry and the crash of steel. Cannon on both sides bellowed, their balls gouging earth and men without distinction. The Allied forces pressed, but the Ottomans held with stubborn skill. Both armies strained like wrestlers, each seeking the moment the other might stumble.
Shortly after 3 in the afternoon, the signal was given. On the far flank, an immense formation of horsemen began to move. 18,000 riders, German cuirassiers, Austrian dragoons, and at the point of the spear, 3,000 Polish Winged Hussars. The hillside seemed to ripple as they gained speed, the beat of their hooves merging into a single thunderous roar. The wings of the hussars, great frames of wood and eagle feathers, caught the sunlight and made a strange keening sound as air rushed past. To the Ottomans below, it must have seemed as though the very sky was falling. They struck like a tidal wave. The sheer mass and momentum shattered the Ottoman lines on impact. Lances splintered, sabers flashed, and the front dissolved in panic. Riders plunged deep into the camp itself, cutting down resistance before it could regroup. It was the death blow the Allies had gambled everything upon, and it had landed. In moments, the Ottoman army's resolve collapsed. Kara Mustafa's great pavilion stood empty, the silks flapping in the wind. Drums and banners were abandoned in the rush eastward. Allied troops surged into the camp, finding half-cooked meals still on the fires, letters unfinished on the tables. Through the smoke-stained gates of Vienna, Sobieski entered to the peal of church bells and the roar of voices. Soldiers and civilians alike pressed forward to touch his hand, to weep in relief. In his dispatch to the Pope, he chose no flourish of rhetoric, no long account of stratagems, only the words, Venimus, vidimus, Deus victit.